What happens when a nation's frontline fighters hit 50 years of service? Can second-hand Gripens really fill the gap left by Brazil's aging F-5 Tigers? And with delays pushing the Gripen EF program all the way to 2032, is the Air Force risking its air dominance or securing it with a smart transitional move? The answers could redefine Brazil's role in South American skies. Brazil is on the verge of the biggest air power gamble in its history. The decision to bring in second-hand Gripen CDs isn't just a stopgap. It could decide whether Brazil maintains regional air dominance or slips into a dangerous capability gap. With delays pushing the Gripen EF to 2032, this temporary fix might actually be the Air Force's most critical move of the decade. Welcome back, SkyJet Wings. For nearly 4 decades, the Saab JAS-39 Gripen was a ghost in the world of air power. Sleek, efficient, admired on paper, but never tested in the chaos of real war. Since that quiet maiden flight in 1988, military analysts from Washington to Moscow kept asking the same question. Could this Scandinavian lightweight ever survive real combat? Or was it destined to remain just the budget jet, the cheaper alternative to America's F-35 or Russia's Su-35? For years, that question haunted the Gripen's legacy. But in July 2025, the answer finally arrived in fire, steel, and precision. A border war erupted between Thailand and Cambodia, brief but brutal. For the first time in history, Gripen fighters of the Royal Thai Air Force were called into real battle. Over just 5 intense days, from July 24th to 28th, the skies of Southeast Asia witnessed what NATO planners never expected: the Gripen in combat. Thai pilots executed pinpoint precision strikes against Cambodian artillery, using laser-guided bombs with chilling accuracy. Targets that once required entire squadrons were neutralized by just a handful of jets, silent, efficient, unstoppable. And in those 5 days, the Gripen transformed from an export option into a combat-proven NATO asset. It was Sweden's first true baptism by fire, and it sent a quiet shockwave through defense ministries worldwide. Because this wasn't just a fighter jet winning its first war. It was a message. Sweden is no longer neutral, no longer watching from the sidelines while the superpowers play their games. The Nordic ghost had finally awakened. Since joining NATO in March 2024, Sweden has undergone one of the most dramatic military transformations in modern Europe. Once known as a quiet, neutral Nordic nation, now it's a frontline power. Within just 18 months, Stockholm has committed warships, ground forces, and nearly a quarter of its entire Gripen fleet to NATO missions. The world expected Sweden to be cautious, hesitant to provoke Russia, but what followed shocked even its closest allies. Instead of restraint, Sweden went all in. Defense spending surged to nearly 3% of GDP, an unheard-of figure for a country that once prided itself on neutrality. Advanced drone defense systems were rushed into service. Swedish pilots began intercepting Russian reconnaissance planes over the Baltic almost weekly. And in record time, the Swedish Air Force fully integrated with NATO's Eastern Defense Grid. Then came the moment that changed everything: the Gripen's combat debut. That single event didn't just prove a jet's capability, it validated Sweden's place in NATO's power structure. Because what NATO feared most wasn't Sweden being weak, it was Sweden becoming too strong, too fast. A nation that once stood on the sidelines is now the alliance's new spearhead, a symbol of how small nations can redefine modern warfare. In barely a year, Sweden went from neutral observer to military disruptor, fielding a jet that challenges the global defense economy itself. Across the world, shockwaves are spreading. Colombia and the Philippines are re-evaluating their Air Force plans. Ukraine is openly hinting it expects to receive Gripen soon. Russia is struggling to justify how its Baltic dominance keeps eroding. And even America's allies, locked into trillion-dollar F-35 programs, are beginning to ask a dangerous question. Did we underestimate the Scandinavian challenger? Because now, the question is no longer, can the Gripen fight? It's, who can stop it?
That question, can the Gripen fight, has already been answered over Cambodian skies. Now comes the real test. What happens when a jet NATO once ranked as second tier becomes its frontline warplane in the most dangerous theater on Earth, the Baltic, staring directly at Russia's borders? The age of neutrality is over. The age of the Gripen has begun. How does a nation go from centuries of neutrality to the sharp tip of NATO's spear in less than 2 years? For Sweden, the answer is both shocking and deliberate. This wasn't just a change in policy, it was a rebirth of national identity. A country once defined by staying out of wars has now chosen to arm, align, and lead. The reason? One event: Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. That invasion shattered Europe's illusion of lasting peace. For decades, Sweden thrived in the geopolitical shadows, trading, negotiating, and quietly defending itself without taking sides. But the moment Russian tanks crossed Ukraine's borders, neutrality died. When Finland applied for NATO membership, Stockholm realized it could no longer stand alone. The Baltic Sea, once a buffer, had become a front line. So, in March 2024, Sweden made it official: NATO membership. On paper, it looked calm, a diplomatic signature, a handshake. But in reality, it was the biggest military realignment in Northern Europe since the Cold War. Overnight, NATO didn't just gain another member, it gained a strategic coastline, direct access to the Arctic routes, and a nation ready to fight, fund, and integrate faster than anyone expected. The result? A smaller country that now stands eye to eye with Moscow, armed with one of the world's most efficient multi-role fighters, and a new identity built not on neutrality, but on deterrence. And this transformation has only just begun. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Sweden's military evolution and the Gripen's combat debut, hit like and subscribe SkyJet Wings to stay with us as we uncover how a quiet Nordic nation became NATO's unexpected spearhead. Now, back to the video. Sweden didn't tiptoe into NATO, it leapt. By September 2024, it had committed 1,200 troops, 6 warships, and 24 Gripen fighters, nearly a quarter of its fleet, to NATO missions. That's not caution, that's a statement. Once a silent observer, Sweden's military now operates under NATO command. Gripens on Polish runways, warships in Baltic patrols, Arctic troops training with allies in brutal cold. Defense spending? Up to 2.8% of GDP, aiming for 3.1% by 2028, higher than most of NATO. Neutrality is gone. Sweden has militarized with intent, and Moscow is watching closely. For Russia, a neutral Sweden once meant a soft gap in NATO's shield, control over Baltic sea lanes and airspace. Now, that gap has closed. In less than 2 years, Sweden has become NATO's forward edge, strategically placed, heavily armed, and ready. Its Gripen jets now face off directly against Russian Su-35s and bombers. But one question remained: would the Gripen ever prove itself in real combat? Because in modern warfare, paper performance means nothing until the first bomb falls and the first missile fires. The answer came in July 2025, thousands of miles from Europe, in a border clash no one thought would matter, until the Gripen rewrote history. When Thailand's Gripen fighters roared into their first real war, the shock was immediate. A jet long dismissed as a budget option had just become a combat-proven weapon. The Gripen's first kill wasn't just Cambodia's loss, it was the world's awakening. Can a fighter stay a legend on paper for nearly 40 years and still earn instant respect in its first battle? That's exactly what Sweden's JS-39 Gripen just did. For decades, critics called it the underdog jet, cheaper than America's F-35, less menacing than Russia's Su-35, and without the mystique of China's J-20. Sleek, efficient, and beloved by pilots, yes, but untested, unblooded. That changed in July 2025, when artillery erupted along the Thai-Cambodian border near Humakua Ridge and Ta Mon Temple. The Royal Thai Air Force made a bold decision: deploy its Gripen CD fleet, bought from Sweden years earlier but never used in combat. For 5 days, from July 24th to 28th, the world watched the Gripen prove its worth. Thai pilots flew precision strike missions, using laser-guided bombs and smart munitions with surgical accuracy. In one strike, an entire Cambodian artillery battery was wiped out in minutes, silenced before it could threaten Thai ground forces again. The result stunned analysts everywhere. The Gripen didn't just survive combat, it excelled, with precision, reliability, and efficiency that even NATO commanders couldn't ignore. The Gripen's first kill turned it overnight from an export experiment into a combat-proven predator. Many jets look invincible at air shows, few survive real combat. Gripen did, instantly earning global credibility. Cambodia retreated, Thailand declared victory. Sweden suddenly had what money can't buy: a reputation. For buyers from Latin America to Asia, one truth echoed: this jet works. And for Russia, facing Gripens across the Baltic, the message was even clearer: underestimating Sweden just became dangerous. But the real shock came in Europe. Inside NATO war rooms, the Gripen's combat debut landed like a thunderclap. Sweden, once neutral, was now a frontline power. By 2025, Stockholm had pledged troops, warships, and 24 Gripens to NATO. These jets soon began patrolling Baltic skies under NATO command, intercepting Russian aircraft that dared cross the line. At sea, Sweden's navy sealed off Baltic choke points, while new Loki counter-drone systems jammed Russian swarms. NATO's weakest flank, the Baltics, suddenly became its strongest wall. Sweden's entry turned the Baltic from a Russian threat zone into a NATO fortress. For Moscow, the nightmare is real. The battlefield now stretches from the Arctic to the Baltic, filled with Swedish Gripens, Finnish artillery, and NATO fleets. And just as the dust settled, came the next tremor: rumors of Gripens heading to Ukraine. A BBC interview hinted at possible transfers. Sweden denied any immediate deal, but it didn't matter. The psychological effect was done. Even the possibility of Gripens flying for Kiev forces rethink its entire air strategy. That's the new weapon Sweden wields, not just firepower, but uncertainty. The Gripen didn't just prove itself in combat, it reshaped Europe's map of power. By holding back Gripen transfers to Ukraine, Stockholm avoids direct confrontation, yet sends a chilling message: it can project air power deep into Eastern Europe anytime it chooses. The Gripen has become more than a weapon, it's a psychological ghost fighter haunting Russian planners. Analysts in Brussels and Washington see it clearly. Sweden is no longer a quiet NATO newcomer. It's now a strategic lever, influencing events far beyond its borders without firing a single shot.
Behind that rise is Sweden's defense industry, lean, fast, and fiercely innovative. Spending 2.8% of GDP on defense, Stockholm is outpacing many larger allies. Every krona goes into next-gen jets, drone systems, and surveillance tech. The Gripen, once mocked as a budget fighter, is now a combat-proven NATO-integrated platform rivaling aircraft twice its cost. Its success has triggered a global shift. Nations from Colombia to the Philippines are reconsidering their air power choices. Sweden's rapid deployment of the Loki counter-drone system in just 84 days shows why NATO now looks north for innovation. Strategically, Sweden's geography completes the picture, a northern spearhead with instant access to the Baltic and Arctic. Gripens can launch from short, hidden runways and hit key Russian targets in minutes. That speed and adaptability make traditional Russian calculations obsolete. For Moscow, this is a nightmare. The Baltic Sea, once a buffer, is now a NATO fortress. Every move, every radar ping, every flight path is shadowed by Sweden's rising reach. This is more than deterrence, it's transformation. Sweden has turned its small size into an outsized impact, reshaping European security from the Arctic to Ukraine. The age of the Gripen has begun, and the world, especially Moscow, will never see Northern Europe the same way again. Subscribe to SkyJet Wings, where defense, power, and technology collide. Hit the bat icon to stay ahead of every breakthrough shaping tomorrow's skies. Like, share, and join the discussion, because in this new era of air power, knowledge is your strongest weapon.